Attention everyone, this is your half-hour call to places. This is Half Hour. You're listening to Dynamic Dialogues. Whether you're a long-standing professional in the field, an aspiring stage manager, or simply curious about what happens behind the curtain, you're invited to be a part of this immersive journey as we explore the intricacies of leadership, entertainment, and what it means to be human. Welcome back, everyone. In this episode, I interviewed Sharon delPilar, who is a professional stage manager with a background in musical theater, circus, and live sports. She's worked on productions such as Hairspray, The Producers, Flower Drum Song, Mamma Mia, Phantom of the Opera, and Jersey Boys, as well as Cirque du Soleil's Love, and most recently with Channing Tatum on Magic Mike Live. Recently, she's also been working with the Las Vegas Raiders and also has done special sporting events such as Formula One, the Las Vegas Grand Prix, and the Super Bowl. As well, in our conversation, we discussed her transitions from all of her positions and the challenges and adaptations that she had to make in these transitions. And also, we talked about how we define our role as stage managers and how we can present our skill set to employers that may fall outside of the entertainment industry, and how we can get jobs in different industries and different sectors that may not be in the entertainment industry. So it's a super great conversation, some really valuable insights. So I hope you like it. And if you do, please consider subscribing and giving it a share to your friends. I would really appreciate that. All right, here we go. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast and talking about your experience as a stage manager and moving into different areas of management. Can you talk about your experience as a stage manager briefly and kind of what got you moving outside of stage management?
Sure. First off, thank you really for having me. It's an honor. And just a little bit of my background. It was never my intention to get into entertainment and stage managing. It all just sort of fell into that direction. I had gone to college with the intention of becoming a physical therapist. And after about a year of going to school, it was something that, as much as I loved it, felt like I didn't want to be in school forever. It was a very competitive field, and people who were a couple of years ahead of me weren't able to get into physical therapy school, had great grades, tons of extracurriculars, and they were having a tough time getting in. And I thought, I just don't want to be on this sort of merry-go-round of I can apply every fall, and if I don't get in, I have to go to school for another year and wait to apply the next year. And so I was kind of looking for some other alternatives, some other options for me. And long story short, I came across the Disney college program. Ended up doing the Disney college program, thinking that travel and tourism was something that I wanted to explore. Ended up totally falling in love with it. Happened to be assigned to entertainment, working at Walt Disney World in the parks. And that sort of opened my eyes to a possibility of entertainment as a career. It was always something that I enjoyed, but was never something that I thought of as a long-term career for myself. And participated in the college program, which led to a full-time job. After about 3 years there, had done everything I wanted to do and thought, well, what's the next step? Ended up taking an internship in New York with a Broadway producing company. And with that, I learned about the business side of it. I worked with the company managers and learned about contracts and house seats and finances, all those business aspects of theater. And because it was New York City, on nights and weekends, I would volunteer my time with some nonprofit off Broadway shows. Really couldn't afford to pay people, but was willing to give someone with no experience an opportunity to kind of jump in. And it was through that I found my love of stage managing. There were some really wonderful people who kind of took me under their wing, showed me the ropes, and really just gave me that experience. And it was through that, a combination of that and working in this Broadway producing office, that I was able to make lots of connections. And when I realized that stage managing was what I really wanted to do, I was able to focus my energy towards that. And people just gave me opportunities to start out off as a production assistant on a Broadway show. Shows that I had done that were off Broadway, these people in their own right grew into producing larger and larger shows. So having made those connections from the ground up and watching everybody's own careers evolve, you know, someone who knows somebody, you get that phone call, and it just sort of goes from there.
Yeah, so are you originally from the New York area, or did you just move there to do the internship? And
I was born and raised in the Chicago area. It was there that I was exposed to theater by going to shows that were tours that were coming through Chicago. My own high school put on shows, so I participated in that in all different aspects, from uh, tech crew to the orchestra to being on the ensemble one year. And yeah, it was really just me taking a chance and not knowing anyone and just wanting to try certain things out, and moving to Orlando by myself, doing the college program, and then moving to New York, not knowing anyone,
Mhm.
wanting to have this experience for myself.
How were you able to move to New York and take that internship? Did they offer any sort of incentive as an intern to be in New York, or did you just kind of get a part-time job or full-time job or whatever? How did you support yourself in that endeavor?
Well, one of the things that was really great about this particular producing company, and this was many, many, many years ago, was they actually did offer a stipend. They were one of the few that, one, actually offered an internship program, and two, actually paid a stipend. And so, you know, that helped to pay the bills. Not completely.
Yeah,
It's New
of
York
course.
City after all. And then with that, I was also, because I was participating in an internship, I qualified for student housing. And so I was able to find a place that was reasonable for the time that I was an intern. Qualified for it wasn't necessarily, it was housing that wasn't necessarily tied to a particular university or college. You just had to either be a student, a full-time student, or you had to be an intern to qualify to live in this housing complex. And then after my internship was over, because I had been in New York for a while, I had gotten to know a few people and was able to, when I decided to stay and was offered a full-time job, I was able to find a place out in New Jersey, which was a short commute into the city, with some wonderful roommates.
So you started working with the company managers, and then you said you started working with just like smaller theaters around the city. What was it that got you, like, did someone ask you, "Oh, hey, we need a stage manager. Can you stage manage?" Or like, did you shadow stage managers? What was your introduction to that, going from working with company management with the Broadway producers and then shifting into volunteering in a variety of situations? Like, what was the thing that kind of got you into stage management?
So for me, it was, at the time, it was just finding stuff on the internet. I mean, you know, postings, job postings on things on like playbill.com. People are looking for a stage manager, or people are looking for a production assistant or something like that. And I would just send out resumes to all of these different companies. A couple of people took interest in what my resume said, even though there wasn't much to it, and wanted to give me a chance. And they themselves were producing a lot of different things, from award shows to plays to readings of small musicals, you know, a lot of developmental things. And at least on the with the Broadway producing office, they were producing a lot of things at that time. And when I knew that stage managing was something that I was really interested in, I went to the general manager that I was working for and said, I really want to pursue stage managing. And she was incredibly supportive of that and willing to let me go as a full-time employee to go and pursue something that I was really interested in, and said, you know, the next show that we have that's going to go to Broadway, we can get you a spot as a production assistant, as long as the stage management team is okay with that. And so that was my opportunity to get in on the Broadway side and learn from these incredible stage managers who had dozens of years of experience.
What was the show that was your first kind of Broadway show?
Well, on the when I took the internship, I was you get assigned to to a particular show, and the show that I was assigned to was the Swing National Tour. So because of that, of course, the company managers that I was working for, they were out on the road, so I didn't necessarily work exclusively with them. So they also kind of put me with the company managers of the show, the producers. So it was through that I was offered a full-time job and ended up working with assisting the company managers of the producers. And then my first Broadway show as a production assistant working with the stage managers was Hairspray.
As a new stage manager, what was that like as a fresh stage manager going into like such a large operation like that and actually seeing what that's like? Like what was your reaction to that?
It was incredible, particularly with my experience on Hairspray, because I got involved when it was table reads. It was very much in development. At the very first one that I joined in on, Hairspray was still only one act. It hadn't been developed fully into two acts at that point. It had a different director, uh, a somewhat different cast at that point. And so to watch it go from a table read, just a bunch of people sitting at tables reading scripts, a piano in the corner, to a full blown production with costumes and lights and sets. And, you work in that rehearsal studio for so long and really don't know how it's going to be received. And you hear the response from that very first audience. There's nothing like it. It was really, really incredible to be on that journey and to see how far the show had come over the course of, I don't know, maybe a couple of years that at least I was involved.
Wow. Yeah, how long did you do previews for that show?
So for Hairspray, we were rehearsing in New York for, gosh, it's been so long I can't even remember really exactly, but maybe about 4 weeks. And then we did an out of town tryout in Seattle. So we traveled out to Seattle, teched the show in Seattle, and then did maybe 2 or 3 weeks of performances in Seattle before we came back, rehearsed again, rehearsed the show again in New York, tech the show in New York, and then opened in August of 2002, 2003, 2002, I think it was. And yeah, so it was a pretty long process. But even before that, we were doing readings of table reads and then readings for producers and investors. Probably, I would say maybe every 6-ish months leading up to the official run, so to speak, of rehearsing for the out of town tryout in Seattle and then and Broadway.
And so while you were a production assistant, you were just helping the stage management team essentially. Like you were assigned specifically to stage management throughout that process.
That's correct. So a lot of the stuff that I did was one of the biggest parts of my job as a production assistant on that particular show was to handle or to manage script changes
Hmm.
because it was a brand new show.
Lots
Um,
of changes.
Essentially still in development. Yes, there were lots of changes, not only script changes, but music changes. There were
Right.
entire songs that were cut. There were
Oh yeah.
verses that were cut. There were verses that were changed.
Probably
So
even
many
as
things.
probably even as small as lines and words that were
Oh,
changed.
yes, absolutely. So one of the things that I did, they had me do was work very closely with the associate director and the composers to make sure that all those changes were in the official script and distributed to everybody, to the creative team, to the cast, to stage management, so that everybody had the exact same version of the show on that day.
Yeah.
And of course, it changed daily, all
Yeah.
the way
Of
through
course.
rehearsals, through previews, all the way up until we opened a few days before we opened on Broadway. And then of course there were other things too. That was my main job, but there were, of course, supporting the stage managers
Of course.
with, rehearsal props and just everything under the sun, however we could support the stage management team.
You said that you were working on this project for a while before it even got to its, actual main production period of, previews and opening on Broadway. During that time, I assume you were working on other things in the times that you weren't like doing a read for people or doing the tryouts or rehearsals or anything. So, I mean, that's my assumption at least. Or were you working on this show full time from the very beginning?
When we were doing table reads, it was not a full-time thing. I was still working full-time in the producing office,
Gotcha.
and they would let me go because it was table reads were probably only a week where we were all together.
Hmm.
Very short period of time, so they could let me go for that period. But once we started rehearsals for Seattle and Broadway, that was then full time. So
Hmm.
I had at that point resigned from my position at the producing office to pursue this.
I'm curious about the out of town tryout thing, and you might be able to shed light on this, but can you answer why producers do a tryout like in a different city in a different market whenever their intention is to go back to New York and to Broadway? I've always wondered that because I went to grad school at UCSD and La Jolla Playhouse is a huge tryout location for a lot of big shows. And it's something I've always wondered, and I'm curious if you have an answer for that.
It might have changed over the years, but I know that from the time when I was involved in that sort of thing, and we out of town tryouts were very common. It was a way for producers and the creative team to develop a show without New York critics and sort of the New York atmosphere getting involved. This was a way for the show to get an audience, have some feedback before going into the city and actually being subjected is not really the right word, but being subjected to, New York critics and New York audiences. And, they wanted to have a more stable product.
Yeah, that makes sense. And perspective too, as well, because the audiences will react, they could react differently in a different market. It's I guess that does make sense. I've always just wondered because they rehearse it they do the table read and rehearse in New York and they go through this whole process and then they basically remount it somewhere else completely and then they go back to New York and they do it all over again. So yeah, I was always curious about that, but that does make sense to kind of be outside of the climate of New York and what that means and what it adds to probably just the overall stress of everything. It's kind of like you remove yourself from that situation so you don't have to interact with that energy.
Yeah, it used to be far more common to do that. I think now maybe it's not as financially feasible to want to spend that money to go do an out of town tryout.
Right. And also the
Depends.
contracting, they don't have to be on a production contract. They can be on a LORT contract, which is more affordable. I'm sure there's a lot of factors to it that play into that. So you were on Hairspray as a production assistant. Did you stay a production assistant until you moved on to your next thing, or did you become a sub or an ASM, or how did your trajectory work from being a production assistant?
So after the show opened, that they no longer need their production assistants. So you kind of go in one of two routes essentially. Is you either move on to the next thing or you become one of their sub stage managers to cover personal days and vacations and whatnot. I moved on to another production right across the street, as luck may have had it, on a show called Flower Drum Song. It was a revival of a Rodgers and Hammerstein show. That was the production stage manager calling me up and saying, "Hey, we need a PA. Can you help us out?" And this production stage manager I had worked with on a previous reading of Hairspray a few years back, and so helped him out with that. And from there, I they trained me there as their sub ASM. So that was the start of that, and led to other things from there.
Yeah. How long were you working in New York as like in the Broadway circuit, off Broadway, whatever, just like New York theater in general?
About 3 years. Three
Okay.
years working in New York before it took me out on the road and other places regionally.
And did your move out of New York, was that with like a touring Broadway show that transitioned you out of working specifically in New York?
It was never really intended. It just sort of happened that way. I went out on tour. I'd come back to New York, worked on a few other projects in outside of New York, and one particular one was a show called Mamma Mia, which was opening in Las Vegas, and helped them set up that show for a few months, and then came back to New York and was their sub ASM to cover vacations. But because I was not in Las Vegas at that time, if they knew in advance that a stage manager was taking a week long vacation, they would reach out to me and I would fly into Vegas and cover for them. And then about a year after opening Mamma Mia in Las Vegas, I got another call that said, we're doing the show. It's called We Will Rock You. It's a Queen musical in Las Vegas. Can you help us out? Again, thought, all right, 3 months in Vegas, no problem. Had a good time on Mamma Mia. Don't mind doing it again. With the show, we started the rehearsal process. They had some changes in the middle of production, some staffing changes. They asked me to stay. I ended up staying for the entire run of the show, which was about a year and a half. And about a month or two after We Will Rock You closed, Hairspray was opening in Vegas.
Wow.
And it was the same producing team. It was the same general manager. It's essentially a lot of the same people. And they said, well, you know everyone, you know the entire creative team. Can you stay in Vegas and help us with Hairspray? And sure enough, did that. And it just show after show kept coming from New York to Vegas, and all my connections from New York knew that I was in Vegas, and I just kept working. And, you know, here we are 20 years later, still in Vegas, and had a very, very wonderful career here as a stage manager working on some of the greatest musicals and other shows in town.
What was the first shift in your career that you can identify where you moved from one type of work situation, so to speak, into something that was outside of the realm that you were used to, where you're using the same skill set, but it's perhaps in a different way, or it's just not in the same format? What was the first shift for you?
So I think it sort of happened in more than one way. So I think that first layer for me was after Hairspray had closed here in Las Vegas. It was a very sudden closing, very little notice. And it was one of those times where I had no idea what was going to happen for me next. I wasn't prepared because we had such short notice. And I ended up getting a job as an ASM on the Beatles' Love, a Cirque du Soleil show here in Las Vegas. And the only thing that I had done up to that point was musical theater. So it was really all I had known. And Cirque du Soleil operates very differently than musical theater. So that was a very, very big shift for me. That was a huge learning curve that it took me quite a while to get used to and to really accept. And so that was sort of the first layer. But looking back on that now, all these years later, even theater itself has evolved where they are doing more aerial scenes. They're using more aerial equipment. They're using a lot of these things that came from the circus world that are now
Yeah,
being incorporated into musical theater. So a lot
yeah,
of that stuff, a lot of the things that I learned with my time at Cirque, I was able to take those things when I went back into musical theater and apply them in the musical theater world, because the rest of the team that I was working with didn't have the circus experience that I did. So it was me being able to bring maybe a new way of thinking or a new option or different ideas to the table. So I would say that was my first transition or something that had me thinking a different way. As musical theater kind of disappeared from Las Vegas, and there were other shows that were not Cirque du Soleil who were using these it was sort of a combination of musical theater and a combination of circus. I was sort of able to take my experience from both worlds, meld them, and kind of create something new and a new way of thinking. And like, oh, this really worked in the circus world, and this really worked in musical theater world. Why don't we kind of find a way to bring them all together and to sort of help with the functionality as a stage manager?
What would you say was kind of one of the biggest challenges for you going from having a purely musical theater background working in an environment like Cirque du Soleil? Have you been able to identify what that is and like I guess just the biggest challenge that it was for you? You said that you had to work in a completely different way than you had worked before.
Yeah, so for me, my experience was that, in musical theater as a stage manager, there is a little bit more freedom creatively, right? You work in a very different function as a stage manager in musical theater than you do as a stage manager with a company, I mean, essentially a corporation like Cirque du Soleil. I found in musical theater, there was more freedom to be more involved in the creative aspects, where you have part of the stage management's department's responsibilities to maintain the show artistically, and technically once the creative team leaves. Cirque du Soleil, they have a whole other department for that handles all of that. And I get it. Those shows are enormous. So it takes so many more people to be able to do that. And terminology is different as well. That was a new learning experience for me, learning to understand the circus world and the terms that they use. I had no experience in flying and all the things that are very unique to Cirque du Soleil and circus world. And even as much as when you work for a company like Cirque du Soleil, everyone's coming from all over the world. So you're getting a really quick education on different cultures, different languages, how to communicate with people who English is not their first language, or maybe they don't speak English at all, which was not really something that you had to deal with in musical theater. There's a lot of really great things that I was exposed to during my time with Cirque du Soleil.
I agree with you on that. It's definitely a different type of, like you said, function, and you're really working in a different, yeah, like a different lane completely. While you're still stage managing, it's a lot more. I feel like it's a lot more zoomed in as a stage management because you have an artistic director, and you have the coaching department and people that are really focusing on pieces of the show, and stage management in a way is less artistically involved, depending on the artistic director, I think, and the stage management department. But like you're saying, I feel like theater is much more of like a partnership with the director, especially during rehearsals and tech and everything, because you're essentially taking their role over when they leave and being able to really, tune into what that vision is and being able to take that, beyond and work with understudies and giving notes and things like that, which is not really as much of a thing in the circus world. So I agree with what you're saying. So you worked with Love for a while. Did you work for more than one show in Vegas for Cirque?
No, so at the time when I was hired with Love, they had just opened and they needed additional support staff. But at that point, they had not received approval from the resident show division to hire another stage manager full time. So it was essentially a trial period where it was needed to be proven that additional staff was needed. And so my contract was actually a short-term contract. It was just 3 months, and it got extended another month. It got extended another month, until RSD um, approved having that role being full time. However, at that point where that was determined, I was offered another job, another musical that was coming back into town. Or that was coming into town. So I took that job instead.
So fast forwarding a little bit in your career and continuing on to work in Vegas. What do you identify as like the next big shift? So you said that you've gone from musical theater into the circus world, and then if you're back into musical theater, what would you say is like the next big shift that you felt in your career?
I would say the next big shift was probably as musical theater was going away from Las Vegas. In the time that I have been here, I have seen entertainment in Las Vegas shift in many, many different directions. When I first moved here, Vegas was being dubbed Broadway of the West. Every casino wanted some big musical in their casino. And then it shifted away from that. It went more into the night, Vegas was all about the nightclub scene. So it was very, very difficult for musical theater to compete with the nightclub scene. And then it shifted out of the nightclub scene and went into more residencies, so headliners. And even now, it's kind of shifting. It's still into a little bit of the residency, but not quite the same way that residencies were many years ago. And now it's kind of sharing space with sports. Sports is growing immensely in Las Vegas, professional sports, and not just with Vegas having their own teams here, but hosting major sporting events. So we're seeing another shift again. And so with that, I would say that my next shift for me was as musical theater was making its way out of Las Vegas, there weren't as many shows that were opening, but there were more of these kind of hybrid shows. They weren't fully musical theater, but they also weren't Cirque du Soleil shows. They were sort of these other independent shows that were coming in that were melding these different experiences into their show. So that was again, like I mentioned before, it was a great experience for me to take something from that I learned from my time at Cirque and my time with musical theater and meld it into this unique experience, this unique show that had a little bit of everything in it.
Yeah, the sporting aspect is kind of hitting hard this year, especially because just had the Super Bowl and just had F1 there and the professional teams and everything. So yeah, I could definitely see that becoming more prevalent in Vegas for sure. And you've done some work in sports as well, right? You
That's
started
yeah,
dabbling with that a little bit.
yeah. As I started to see that shift, there were fewer shows that were opening in Las Vegas, and um, you sort of see that shift, and this was really kind of coming in around 2020, right when everything was starting to, everything was shutting down, and it really the time at home gave me an opportunity to look at the landscape of Las Vegas and what are the possibilities, because of course at that point no one really knew what was going to happen. Were shows ever going to come back? Were we going to have jobs to go back to? So where do we what's the transition like if I have to leave entertainment completely? And at that point, the Las Vegas Raiders, or at that time it was the Oakland Raiders, were moving to Las Vegas. And when you really think about it, it's entertainment, just in a different form, not something that we're, that we as stage managers, as theater people are used to. There are very, very similar aspects to it, just in a game setting. So I use that time during the shutdown to really do some research on it, get to connect virtually with people in that space to try and learn about what game presentation is like. And when things started to open up again, and the Raiders had an opportunity to hire employees, I applied for their entertainment department and have spent the last 3 seasons learning about what entertainment and what stage managers do in that world. And while some of it is similar, a lot of it's also very different. Just like anything else, there's stuff that you can take from that experience. There's stuff that I can share from my experience in theater and say, this is how we've done it. This is how we would handle the situation. And as long as people are open to those ideas, we can work together and build something really great. And we've had 3 really incredible seasons of top-notch entertainment that many other sporting teams across the country could only dream of.
What was your approach to reaching out? You mentioned you reached out to people who were working in that area or people at the Raiders organization specifically, or was it just people that you knew through your own network of like who was working in gameplay stuff? Like how did you find your way to get advice or an understanding of what that was like?
While we were all at home during the shutdown, I relied heavily on LinkedIn. LinkedIn was my way of finding who was involved with the organization, people who were involved in the sports industry in entertainment. It was through LinkedIn that I was able not only to make connections, direct connections with these people, but also discover podcasts because people were doing podcasts, people were doing different organizational talks, webinars. I just anything that I could get my hands on to just
Hmm.
learn as much as I could from my home computer about what this world was like and to
Yeah.
see if it was something that I could possibly fit into.
So, as you made this journey on learning and acquiring information and all of that about what this world was like in gameplay, how did you take your work experience, your resume, and how did you package that up? Did you change what sort of things did you change, or did you, if you changed anything, like how did you make it suited towards a job that is entertainment based, that is stage management centric, but that isn't necessarily quote unquote stage manager?
Well, first off, I had to create a non theater resume, which is another big project that I did during the shutdown. And with a theater resume, it's pretty much just your credits, right? The shows that you've done, the directors you've worked with. That doesn't really mean anything to somebody outside of the industry. So I kind of had to create what I call as a real world resume that lists what your responsibilities were, things that you accomplished. And another one of the things that I did was I took lots of resume writing courses, attended webinars on how to write because I had never created a resume in that form.
Like a real one.
Yeah. So I really just needed some guidance on how to how to best tackle this and YouTube videos, any sort of resources that I could find on resume writing is what I turn to. And what I've learned too is that when you're looking at these jobs postings, like what I did with when the Raiders first put out their posting for seasonal employees uh, for all their home games in entertainment, you look at that job description and you pull out those keywords and you find, okay, yes, these are skills that I have as a stage manager in theater, and you find your way to tweak that resume. You don't really want to have one full resume that you just send out to everybody. Depending on what that job description has in that posting, you want to curate a resume for each individual job posting that you're going to do, just for many different reasons. Sometimes you don't want to send out a 3-page resume. You want to send out a nice, clean, concise 1-page resume, unless it's very specific and asks for, your very detailed work history. But I find that most really just want a 1-page resume. So you want to really find those finer details that match what that job description is looking for.
So you essentially taught yourself what you needed to do to make a essentially a new formatted resume, and you just picked out details from your experience to what they were looking for, essentially. And
Yeah. Yeah, pretty much. And just getting ideas from lots of different people on how do we describe what we do as a stage manager. You ever really think about it. And
Yeah.
things like the things that I had trouble with were like, how do I quantify the work that we do? You can't really, it's really difficult to say something like, well, our work helped increase ticket sales by
Yeah.
30%. And that's not really stuff that we would do it and think about it as stage managers. So how are we able to quantify the success of our work? Um, so you really just have to I mean, what I did was just try to find different examples and try to find creative ways to explain what we do,
Hmm.
the responsibilities that we have, and really think about the ways that these can be translated into different industries and how to express that to people who don't know the theater world or aren't as familiar with the theater world and what we do.
How were you able to quantify what we do as stage managers?
Well, I
What?
haven't really found
Yeah.
the right thing yet, but I looked at other people's resumes. I read lots of different job descriptions, um, both stage managing posts and things that I felt like were maybe close to what we did, and kind of looked at that and looked at either the job requirements or the job description, and sort of just made notes of things that I liked about the way that was described or was very similar to what I would use to describe our job description as stage managers, and would
Hmm.
apply that to my own resume.
But it is an interesting exercise for sure to like really think about the things that we do because the skill set that we have as stage managers is, while very specific, it's very applicable to a lot of different types of jobs and positions. And the things that we do at its core is really similar to a lot of other positions. It's just put inside of this application that is an entertainment sort of thing. And so on the outside, it looks like this nebulous, what does a stage manager do? Even if you describe it to someone, they still don't really get it. They're like, I really don't, still don't get what you do. But the day-to-day tasks and application of what we do is, I think, pretty straightforward. It just gets a little foggy because we're working in like a creative environment and managing something that is that's not tangible, so to speak. So I think that like really like looking at the facts of kind of what our position is and like we do on a day-to-day basis. I think looking at other job descriptions is a great way to do that because you can read through something and know for sure, like, oh yeah, like that's definitely something I do. It might be worded in a different way, or it might be the example might be a little bit different, but if you can apply that to what we do, it's essentially the same thing a lot of times.
I would even add to that and say that even the title of the position could be something that does not sound anywhere near stage managing, because that was another difficult thing in going through LinkedIn. Was people call things, positions very differently
Uh-huh.
in industries, in different industries, but essentially the job description or the skill set is very similar. So, even just clicking on things on jobs postings that might not even sound anything remotely close to what a stage manager would do, you'd be surprised by what you'd find.
Oh, do you have an example of like a weird one that you can remember that you looked at?
Um, well, yeah, I mean, I guess even my position at the Raiders. So while we are essentially stage managers because we are dealing with talent, we are organizing the entertainment offerings on game days. The position that I have, or the position that I started with, was game day representative. I guess it's really game day entertainment representative. It doesn't really say anything about stage managing,
Hmm.
but it really is what we are doing.
Yeah, that's a very like corporate way to name positions. Like when you work, with like local crews on productions in certain areas, or you work on just like larger things, and they have like what are the like temp agencies? I feel like that's a position that like a temp agency would give a position like representative. There's another term that I can't think of right now. Brand ambassador. Like
Right.
things like that. It's like very corporate-y and very general. But essentially, when you look into it, it's like, oh yeah, like this is right up my alley. So, which takes a little bit more effort because then you have to click on things that you're not really sure if it's gonna be applicable. But so yeah, that more time intensive, I would imagine, to really go
Yes.
through, especially in your search. You're like, okay, I'm finding certain positions that are what I have skill sets for, but then it's like, how do you tailor your search to where you can actually find positions that are useful for your hunt?
Right. And then I also learned a lot about sort of in the corporate structure, where in the stage management department you'd have the ASM and then you have the SM and then you have the PSM. In other industries, it would be the coordinator would be equivalent to an ASM, then a manager would be equivalent to an SM, and then the director would be equivalent to the PSM. That's another thing that I learned while sort of going through these different jobs postings and learning more about industries outside of our own.
Besides LinkedIn, were there any other connections that you had that were able to help you transition out of the musical theater space, or did you kind of do that on your own, just based on your observations of how things were changing and COVID and everything like that?
LinkedIn was really the foundation for me getting to know other industries. It was where I learned about different podcasts that were out there at the time, and that really, yeah, it really laid the foundation for me, and continues to help me learn about other industries that I might be right for in the future. Um, but no, it was that was pretty much where I've gotten most of my information, and then gotten a lot of connections through there, and learned about either somebody's website or podcast or a webinar that might have been happening.
Yeah, I use LinkedIn a lot too, for probably for the past several years. I mean, I've been on LinkedIn since like the very beginning, it's almost, and so I've used it a lot in just transitioning in and out of different kinds of work. I'm curious, what do you think of LinkedIn Premium? Do you feel like that's something that is helpful? Do you use Premium? Like what's your opinion about Premium and its either helpfulness or not? Worth it or
I personally don't use LinkedIn Premium. I've found that just using the free version is enough, is sufficient for what I need. It might be helpful for other people, but for me, was able to do what I needed to do uh, with the free version on its own.
Yep, I agree. I feel like it's yeah, it just wasn't super beneficial for me either, just because of the nature of how we apply and the kind of things that we have to do. I didn't really have much interest in knowing exactly who viewed my profile, or which I feel like is really the main feature of premium, being able to cold message someone and or see exactly who viewed your profile. But besides that, yeah. I think that's pretty much all I had to really talk about. I just wanted to get your insight on how you weaved in and out of your different experiences, and it's been super insightful and great to learn about how you approach moving from one thing to the next thing, and how you changed essentially your kind of what you did and you melded it into something new. And I feel like as stage managers, that's something that we are constantly having to do. We're constantly having to adapt and constantly having to put on different hats, especially in the theater world where you're going from contract to contract a lot of times. It's not full time employment all the time. And I think some people don't understand that all the time, especially people who are outside of the industry. They don't they don't see that part of it of having to come onto a new team that perhaps you've never worked with before, or a majority of people you haven't worked with before. So I think that this is just another extension of the adaptability and the nimbleness that we have to have in our industry, is being able to pivot really quickly into something that maybe we've never done before, but that we have the experience to do it, and we have the knowledge, we have the ability. It's just that we have to find a way to approach it to where it's within that scope of what the employer's hoping from us.
I think that there are a lot of skills that we as stage managers have that can be applied to virtually any industry. That, like you said, it's the adaptability, it's the being able to make a decision in an instant. Because in musical theater or circus or wherever, a lot of times it decisions have to be made right in that instant to keep the show going, to continue to make sure that everybody is safe. There are these instinctual things that you have to have as a stage manager that really can be applied to any position, in any industry. It's having the organizational skills, having the people skills, having to work with different types of people with different backgrounds, different ways of working, and finding that way put to have everybody work together and being that glue for that organization. Um, there's so many things that really can be applied to anything and everything. There are so many times where other industries don't realize how valuable having a theatrical stage manager on your team is going to benefit your company, no matter what you're doing. And I think it's really not, unfortunately, it's not until somebody decides to take a chance on a stage manager and to apply them into a different industry that they're
Yeah.
going to realize that value. It's really difficult. It's difficult to break into other industries if it's something that somebody wants to transition, out of theater into something else. But it's just going to take that special person who maybe had a theater background,
Hmm.
back in the day and transitioned themselves. But it is a difficult task to do, but it is possible. There are a lot of people who have transitioned, particularly um, since COVID,
Hmm.
have
Yeah, I can
found
imagine.
that they wanted to do other things and step outside of the theater world. So, maybe there are more opportunities now than there were pre-COVID,
Hmm.
because you do have a lot of people who were once in theater that are now moving into other industries, who do recognize the value of what a stage manager can bring, and what stage managers' experiences are like, and what that skill set can offer.
Yep, I completely agree that people who hire stage managers, it's extremely effective skill set. Like there's so much that we deal with that is not really experienced in a lot of other positions. Like you're saying, we're in like a live setting that is there's constant micro decisions and things that have to be adjusted, or things that's happening that the audience can't see that you're having to deal with on headset that the audience doesn't know about, so you have to keep the show going. And it's just like a myriad of things, as you know, and having the ability and the skill set to deal with that and still keep composure and still do your job really well and keep everyone safe. That is it's I think that we take it for granted sometimes because we do it and we're used to it and we know what it is and we feel what that feeling is and we know how to deal with it. But other people, if they're in that position, people who shadow me show calling and stuff, it's interesting to hear someone's reaction after the show or during intermission or whatever, and to just say, hey, like, what do you think about it? Like, do you have any questions? And a lot of people are like, I don't know how you do this, and how do you just deal with all of the things. There's like 12 people talking to you at one time. And I think that's just a part of it that a lot of people don't see if you're not a stage manager. Even people who are working in the industry, designers or actors, performers, you name it. A lot of people don't really quite understand exactly what that pressure is sometimes until they're in the hot seat, or they've shadowed someone, or they see what it's like, and like, wow, I really understand kind of how valuable your position is now. And so applying that to other positions in different industries, I think is like you're saying, is super valuable, because we have that ability to multitask and to handle a lot of the pressure that's coming at us. So I'm going to end it here. Thank you again so much, Sharon, for taking your time and sharing your insight and your knowledge, and telling us a little bit about your journey as a stage manager and going into different positions and kind of the unknown in a way, challenging yourself and growing yourself as a leader, as a person, as a stage manager. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider checking out the Half Hour blog at itshalfhour.blog, where we have multiple articles around leadership topics, communication tips, and much more. So check it out at itshalfhour.blog. If you'd like to learn more and listen more to this podcast, you can check it out at dynamicdialoguespodcast.com. We have new episodes every Monday. Click the subscribe button and you'll be notified when they're released.